Today's hearing will investigate the current landscape around antitrust liability for the NCAA, which has created issues around name, image, and likeness payments, known as NIL, the transfer portal, and eligibility rules in college athletics. A series of court opinions finding antitrust liability against the NCAA, most notably the Supreme Court's 2021 Alston decision, calls into question the legality of any rules that limit compensation for student athletes. Further, a patchwork of state laws has made it difficult, if not impossible, for the NCAA to regulate NIL payments to student athletes. An additional ongoing litigation strongly suggests rules governing student athletes transferring schools and eligibility requirements will also be found to violate the antitrust laws. College sports is rapidly heading in the direction of unlimited payments, unlimited transfers, and no rules around who is eligible to compete. In October of 2024, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California granted preliminary approval of a settlement agreement in House versus the NCAA, known as the House Settlement. That paves the way for the first revenue-sharing model in college athletics. It also creates a framework to govern NIL payments from so-called quote-unquote boosters, also known as collectives, and replaces scholarship caps with roster caps. The House settlement does not resolve other pending antitrust litigation against the NCAA, nor does it immunize it from many subsequent antitrust challenges. Further, the House settlement is the product of the NCAA conferences and the plaintiffs' lawyers. Schools, coaches, and athletes largely did not have a seat at that table. Under the current framework, any rule that the NCAA attempts to enforce will face immediate litigation, and history suggests that the NCAA will likely lose every time. Most people can agree that the NCAA went too far with their regulations in the past. For example, the NCAA placed rules around the exact type of snacks student athletes could receive from their teams, prohibited transfers without penalty, and barred legitimate third-party NIL payments. The NCAA was too late to acknowledge that some college sports are large commercial enterprises, and certain student athletes bring great value to their schools. But now, college sports has largely lost any resemblance of the amateur sports that they used to be or collegiate spirit, even when the cost of a sport consistently and greatly exceeds any revenue from it. College sports are rife with play for pay schemes from boosters and schools. And the educational mission of college athletics has been eroded. Specifically, multiple transfers hinder pathways to graduation, and a lack of eligibility rules encourage individuals to stay in college long beyond the average 4-year period. Coaches are finding it difficult to manage their teams because students can transfer at a drop of a hat. This scenario leaves coaches without a functioning roster and harms the student athletes that value consistency in educational and sports programs. Colleges must also shift their recruiting strategies. Recruiting high school athletes is not the focus for some coaches anymore, because getting athletes from the transfer portal is more cost-effective than training the next generation of athletes from the group up. The inability of the NCAA to set rules has turned college and athletics into what would be called by some a semi-professional endeavor, focused more and more on men's football and basketball. The witnesses we have today are perfectly prepared to supply members of the committee with the required information to better inform us as we work on possible solutions to help ensure that college athletics programs remain accessible for the next generation of student athletes. I want to thank the witnesses for appearing before us today and look forward to hearing what each of you has to say. I also want to address, without objection, Mr. Fry and Mr. Moskowitz will be permitted to participate in today's hearing for the purposes of questioning the witnesses if a member yields them time for that purpose. I now will recognize our ranking member, Mr. Nadler, and recognize him for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the business of college sports, a business that generates billions of dollars a year, has seen dramatic changes in recent years, and the industry continues to evolve rapidly. College athletes are being recognized and compensated for their talents and contributions as never before, and new models of compensation continue to develop through litigation and other competitive pressures. But now the NCAA, which generates nearly $1.3 billion a year in revenue, wants to stop this progress dead in its tracks. It wants Congress to step in and protect the NCAA, its conferences and schools from having to share a greater percentage of the money they rake in each year with their unpaid athletes, without whom there would be no revenue in the first place. Unfortunately, instead of highlighting the need for continued reforms to the college athletic system to protect the rights of its athletes, today we are considering whether a repeat antitrust offender should get a bailout and be allowed to turn back many of these recent changes while diminishing the voice of college athletes in perpetuity. The NCAA has lobbied Congress for years, seeking exemptions from our laws to preserve their monopoly on college sports. For example, in the wake of Title IX's passage, ushering in historic opportunities for women in sports, the then all-male NCAA sought exemptions from the law. In advance of litigation with the potential to disrupt their control over broadcast rights, the NCAA sought congressional intervention. When faced with lawsuits that could bring an end to their suppression of athletes' ability to capitalize on their personal publicity rights, also called name, image, and likeness, or NIL, the NCAA asked Congress to step in. And now the NCAA is back, asking us once again to take action on their behalf, to turn back the clock on many recent changes to the collegiate system, and to render college athletes voiceless and powerless. The only professional sports that enjoys the antitrust exemption the NCAA seeks is baseball. And for decades, this exemption suppressed professional baseball players' abilities to unionize, make needed reforms to their sport, and obtain competitive salaries. But now, many of the same Republican lawmakers who have decried Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption want to grant the same safe harbor from our competition laws to the NCAA. We have ample evidence that antitrust exemptions generally suppress wages, block access to necessary health and safety protections, and undermine competition. There is no reason to contemplate a bailout for the NCAA, especially when it has demonstrated little regard for our competition laws, while failing to protect athletes from being exploited. While paying coaches and executives exorbitant salaries from the hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue generated by college athletes, the NCAA insists it needs help from Congress to suppress players' wages and rights to employment status. While looking the other way on academic fraud, the NCAA insists that the current system is necessary to protect, quote, student athletes, close quote. The NCAA knows that athletes often miss class and cannot pursue their major of choice because of practice and travel schedules. Yet they hold out the academic aspect of a college athlete's experience as all important. While the NCAA insists it needs a bailout to ensure the survival of Olympic sports and to protect women athletes, it has failed to sufficiently promote those sports and has failed to ensure its member schools follow Title IX. We should not reward the NCAA by placing restrictions on necessary changes to the collegiate athletic system, changes which are notably benefiting the athletes already, and which the NCAA continues to resist and decry. It is not just college athletes who are concerned about the special protections the NCAA is seeking. The players' associations of all the major professional sports have also weighed in. In a joint statement, they wrote, quote, NIL legislation purporting to protect athletes should not be used as a Trojan horse to nullify athletes' legal rights or status. Legislation that is meant to protect college athletes should under no circumstances eliminate or diminish their rights under contract, tort, antitrust, and/or labor laws, close quote. Similarly, in response to proposed legislation that would affirm that college athletes are employees under the National Labor Relations Act, The Players Association wrote, quote, "Collective bargaining has immeasurably benefited the workers we represent and professional sports as a whole. Athletes enjoy elevated health and safety standards, medical benefits, fair compensation, and other rights both on and off the field. Leagues and teams can negotiate roster construction, player reserve, and other competitive regulations. And fans receive the most compelling entertainment product in the world. The same result is achievable at the collegiate level," close quote. Mr. Chairman, college sports have the power to bring communities together and to electrify the nation. The college football playoffs brought heat to a cold winter, and this month the country will be riveted by March Madness. Perhaps the best way to fully appreciate college athletes is to watch them perform at the highest levels. Please play the video clip.
For the inbounder, looking to bounce, Garcia. We are
up for Casey O'Brien. Sent on net, and Harvey once more. The Badgers will sweep.
Thomas bends it. The superstar strikes for North Carolina. What a goal!
the 1-0. In the end, left center field. Ross on the move. Won't get there. Tennessee walks it off. She was an unstoppable force last season against Iowa, but was coming off the bench. Clark. Oh my! From the future.
As you can see, NCAA college sports are compelling. They're exciting, they're electric, and people want to see them. Advertisers know this, and that is why the business of college sports is so lucrative. But people are tuning in to see great athletes, and it is only fair that the athletes see a portion of the revenue generated by their performances. College sports have also brought many non-financial benefits to its athletes, from life lessons about teamwork, building a strong work ethic, and gaining leadership skills to promoting health and wellness. And for some, it also has the potential to set them on the path to professional glory. But for too many athletes, the current system has failed them. Important changes are underway that have begun to level the playing field, and more are being considered. We should not put our thumb on the scale in favor of an organization that too often has placed its profits over the interests of its athletes. I thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to their testimony. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, who he himself is a two-time national champion wrestler from the University of Wisconsin.
You were supposed to say that last part.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you for putting this hearing together, for all the good work you're doing, for our witnesses for being here. I think there are two fundamental questions. Should we get involved? And if so, what should we do? And this is one of those relatively rare times in congressional hearings where we don't have any, at least on the Republican side, any predetermined outcome about what we should be doing. We're trying to get the answers. I do think it's interesting, the clip that the ranking member played. My guess is almost every single one of those programs that were in whatever respective sport was being shown, most of those programs probably lose money, probably don't make money. There's a handful of universities that athletic departments that do, and trying to figure it all out and figure out what it means to Olympic sports and everything. All these questions we have. So we're trying to get the answers. That's why I appreciate the experts that we brought in today. And it's good that one of those experts is the athletic director from the school I happen to go to, and both our boys graduated from as well, the University of Wisconsin. So we thank you in particular for being here. So we just want to learn, but I do want to thank the chairman for the hard work he has done in putting this together and helping us try to figure out if we should get involved, and if so, what we should do. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Chris McIntosh. Mr. McIntosh is Director of Athletics at the University of Wisconsin, a position he has held since July of 2021. He previously served as Deputy of Athletics and as the Athletic Director from 2017 to 2021, and was himself a Wisconsin student athlete in the late 1990s when he was a consensus All-American tackle and captain on the football team. Mr. McIntosh was a first-round pick in the 2000 NFL Draft by the Seattle Seahawks, where he played several seasons before retiring. Ms. Carol Smith-Gilbert. Ms. Smith-Gilbert is the Director of Men's and Women's Track and Field at the University of Georgia, a position she has held since June of 2021. She previously served as the Director of Track and Field at the University of Southern California, where her teams won multiple national championships. Ms. Smith-Gilbert was a three-time All-American and Pac-10 champion in the 100-meter and the 4x100-meter relay, and the 4x4 relay during the 1990s at UCLA. Mr. Alberto is the head coach of the swim and dive program at the University of Louisville, a position he has held since 2003. His teams and athletes have earned multiple NCAA and conference championships during his tenure. He was also named to the coaching staff of the U.S. national team for the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. He was a 18-time All-American and 3-time NCAA champion swimmer at Oakland University during the 1990s. And Mr. Andrew Cooper. Mr. Cooper is the executive director of the United College Athletes Association, a nonprofit organization that seeks to ensure student athletes are safe, educated, and compensated. He ran cross-country at Washington State University and UC Berkeley. We welcome our witnesses and thank them all for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you all, and please be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. Mr. McIntosh, you may begin.
Chairman Fitzgerald, Ranking Member Nadler, Chairman Jordan, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to be with you today and to talk about the state of college athletics, both the life-changing opportunity that it has and continues to afford to hundreds of thousands of high-potential young people, along with the many challenges posed by the numerous uncertainties that we face. My name is Chris McIntosh, and I have the privilege of serving as the athletic director at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I was fortunate to play football at the University of Wisconsin. It was the experience of a lifetime. I blocked for a Heisman Trophy winner, won 2 Big Ten football championships, and 2 Rose Bowls, and then went on to play a few seasons in the NFL before injury ended my career. As the years following my career continued to accumulate, a few things have become very clear to me. First, what an amazing gift it was to pursue my athletic dreams. Second, the education that I received, the multiple degrees that I have earned from the world-class university, like the University of Wisconsin-Madison, are powerful. They were made possible to me because of a sport. Third, the life lessons taught to me and the mentoring I received by top-notch Hall of Fame caliber coaches like Barry Alvarez, well, that all just changed my life. Our college athletics system, this American system, the tethering of sport and education is truly unique. It's a system where athletes not only compete at top levels of sport, but also receive a valuable education that benefits them for the rest of their lives. It's a system that my 2 oldest children, my daughters, who are Division I volleyball players, are experiencing now. It's the same system that my 16-year-old son aspires to participate in, waking up every morning and working out before school. Is it a perfect system? It is not, but it has and it continues to evolve. Our system has made great strides since the days in which I competed. The opportunity for young people today, for our student athletes, is better than it's ever been. Today we provide guaranteed scholarships for athletes, irrespective of their playing time, continuing health care for athletically related injuries, and funding for degree completion even after eligibility has been exhausted. I am passionate about ensuring that our system continues to improve and that current and future student athletes enjoy the same life-changing experience that I and so many others have benefited from. At Wisconsin, we support nearly 800 student athletes competing in 23 varsity sports. We believe in education, broad-based opportunity, and competitive excellence for all of our sports. At Wisconsin and most other Autonomy 4 programs, the cost of a world-class opportunity for student athletes is funded largely by football. 80% of our revenues in one form or another are derived from the sport of football. Most other athletic programs benefit disproportionately from revenues generated by the NCAA men's basketball tournament. There is no doubt that college athletics is at an inflection point where the decisions made in the near future will define the landscape for generations to come. It is critical now more than ever that Congress work together to pass meaningful legislation that stabilizes college athletics for future generations. We need your help to enhance this model of opportunity for all sports, not just for football and basketball. And in order to achieve that, I believe we owe it to our student athletes to ensure that student athletes can rightfully enjoy the benefits of the pending House settlement and the direct sharing of revenue that, if approved, it will provide, while being permitted to continue to monetize their name, image, and likeness through market-based opportunities. That there is room for future student athletes by allowing us to create and enforce common sense rules that align with the educational mission of college sports and allow for a fair, competitive environment. That we can create rules that allow student athletes to transfer to another institution, but without systematically sacrificing their academic progress, while ensuring that players who do remain with their team have a better idea of who their teammates will be the following season. And that student athletes are not considered to be employees of their respective institutions. And that we can ensure consistency across the country, avoiding the state-by-state patchwork of laws intended to create a competitive advantage for in-state programs. We look forward to working together with Congress to ensure that this uniquely American system of college athletics can be preserved, enhanced, and allowed to thrive. Thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. Ms. Smith-Gilbert, you may begin.
Chairman Fitzgerald, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Carol Smith-Gilbert, and I am the Director of Men's and Women's Track and Field at the University of Georgia. It is an honor to testify before you today as we examine the current state of college athletics. Track and field is one of the most diverse and accessible sports in the world, offering educational opportunities to women, underrepresented students, and international athletes. For more than 25 years, I have coached and developed student athletes, including Olympians and national champions. Without scholarships, many of these athletes would not have the opportunity to attend college at all, and I speak from personal experience. Neither my husband nor myself would have been able to afford the college education we received without an athletic scholarship. We both agree that our college athletic experience saved our lives. The student athletes our coach are not just competitors. They are students pursuing an education and an opportunity to build a future beyond sports. For most, scholarships are the only way they can afford a college degree, and obtaining a college degree is truly the most important thing. To be clear, the number of athletes who are able to have a long and lucrative professional career in track and field is extremely small. So my goal is to ensure that they achieve their potential on the track and in the classroom so that they are prepared for life after college athletics. Yet today, track and field and other non-revenue sports are at risk. The current NIL environment, without a clear uniform national standard, threatens scholarships, undermines roster stability, and creates uncertainty for athletes, coaches, and programs. Of equal importance, implementing an employment model would be devastating for non-revenue sports. Today, our student athlete receives critical resources, nutritionists, athletic trainers, academic advisors at no cost. But as employees, they would have to be responsible for many of these expenses themselves. And for non-revenue sports like track and field, the student athletes aren't making lucrative NIL deals that can support them past college. Instead of providing more opportunities, an employment model would make it harder for young athletes to compete while pursuing a degree. And a college degree provides young people with a lifetime's worth of support. My view on NIL is different from coaches in revenue-generating sports. Unlike those sports where NIL deals can be lucrative, my athletes earn little to no NIL money. Instead, they rely on scholarships, academic support, and university-provided resources to train and compete at an elite level. If I am correct in my concerns about the future of Olympic sports programs, the U.S. developmental program will be seriously damaged. I know this because in sports like track and field and swimming, college programs are the Olympic development program. It isn't theoretical. Of the 118 athletes who competed for Team USA in track and field during the Paris Summer Olympics, 114 developed through the college system. Only 4 did not. That speaks to the critical role that the college athletics plays in Olympic athlete development. My personal fear is without regulation, all money will be spent on football and the impact on non-revenue and Olympic sports will be devastating. I'm concerned many universities will eliminate many Olympic sport programs, depriving countless students of the same opportunities I experienced thanks to college track and field. To ensure the future of college athletics remains strong, I urge Congress to protect universities from excessive litigation, which diverts necessary money from our athletes, and to prevent student athletes from being classified as employees, as doing so will force schools to defund and ultimately eliminate non-revenue sports. I am grateful for the committee's attention on this critically important issue, and I urge you to pass legislation to establish uniform rules that will minimize the chaos and maximize the opportunity for student athletes, especially for those in non-revenue sports, to be able to attend college, compete athletically, and graduate with a valuable college degree. Thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Smith-Gilbert. Mr. Albiero.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Raskin, Chairman Fitzgerald, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on the Administrative State, Regulatory Reform, and Antitrust, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on the important topic of legislative support for college athletics. My name is Arthur Albiero, and I'm honored to testify before this committee. I come before you as a longtime coach, a committed advocate for the student athletes, and someone who believes deeply in the values that collegiate athletics can provide to young men and young women. Values like education, opportunity, and the development of leadership and character. I have had the privilege of being a college swim coach for almost 29 years, and I'm currently in my 22nd season as the head men's and women's swimming and diving coach at the University of Louisville. I'm a former collegiate swimmer when I attended Oakland University in Cal State Bakersfield. I've also been fortunate to be a coach for Team USA in many international competitions. I've been married for almost 30 years to my wife, Amy, also a former collegiate swimmer, and I'm the father of 3 children who grew up swimming and all participated in college swimming at the University of Louisville. In fact, our youngest daughter will be finishing her college swimming career at the NCAA Championships next week. As a coach at the University of Louisville, I'm proud of the growth and development of the swimming and diving programs. We have gone from a program at the bottom of Conference USA to a program now that has consistently been one of the top teams in the country. Based on my experience, I have seen firsthand the transformative power and impact that college sports, and specifically swimming and diving, can have on young men and women. While I'm certainly proud of the athletes' accomplishments in the pool, I'm just as proud of their accomplishments outside the pool. We have countless success stories of former swimmers who are now doctors, engineers, nurses, business owners, CPAs, lawyers, Fulbright scholars, and more. These now adults are leaders in their communities, and they are making a difference in our country. At Louisville, our student athletes dedicate themselves fully to their craft, striving for excellence both in their sport and in the classroom. In fact, our fall 2024 swimming and diving team GPAs were 3.43 for the men's program and 3.51 for the women's program. I give all the credit of these success stories to the current structure of our program at the University of Louisville. We certainly do the work in the pool, but our student athletes are also the beneficiaries of a robust benefit structure, including mental health support, comprehensive nutrition education and support, medical care and support, athletic academic support services, including recovery massage therapy. For a full scholarship athlete at the University of Louisville, these benefits could total over $100,000 annually. Unfortunately, the current structure of college sports, compounded by the complexities of the antitrust law, place these athletes in their sports and now in a precarious situation. While the proposed House settlement will provide a measure of structure to the NIL landscape, it also has consequences for athletic departments that do not generate enough revenue to cover the expenses for all of its sports. Over the last few years, many schools across the NCAA have announced sports cuts or completely eliminated programs in anticipation of the challenges ahead. It's crucial that any action by Congress recognize the unique challenges facing non-revenue sports. Non-revenue sports provide invaluable experiences for the student athletes. These programs can be particularly vulnerable when institutions are now forced to make tough financial decisions. Preserving and strengthening these sports is essential for the future of collegiate athletics and for upholding fairness, equity, and the principles of Title IX. I have serious concerns about student athletes potentially becoming classified as employees. This could create a number of undesirable and unintended consequences, including taxation, changes in medical services, and the opportunities in general for non-revenue sports. The required financial administrative burden of treating student athletes as employees could force institutions to make even more difficult decisions about how many sports institutions are able to offer. In this critical moment, Congress has a unique and important opportunity to address the issues facing college athletics, particularly non-revenue sports, through legislative action. The current climate presents a pivotal moment in which Congress can shape the future of college athletics in a way that aligns with its commitment to fairness, equity, and opportunity for all student athletes. We know that congressional help is important to ensure student athletes are not employees and that NIL has some federal guidelines. However, I would ask that any congressional support also includes protection for the 78% of student athletes who do not compete in football or basketball, because without them, our youth sports pipeline and ultimately Olympic movement will collapse. As I conclude, I want to emphasize that the decisions made in the near future will have a lasting impact on the future of college athletics. Preserve women's sports and non-revenue sports is not just about fairness, it's about upholding the very ideals that make college athletics so special. These programs provide a platform for athletes to succeed both in their sports and education, and they represent a crucial part of the college experience for thousands of young men and women across the country. I urge you to consider the long-term implications of some of these decisions and to act in a way that fosters fairness, equity, and opportunity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Albiero. Mr. Cooper, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm a former track athlete at Washington State University and UC Berkeley, and I now serve as the executive director of the United College Athletes Association. The UCAA is a nonprofit that educates college athletes and unites their voices to advocate for safety mandates, academic protections, and economic rights, ultimately to ensure the NCAA's business model is safe, fair, and sustainable for future generations and for the players who generate the revenue. Currently, 120 women's basketball players in the Big Ten and SEC have joined the UCAA to secure a voice in the NCAA's monopoly. When I say the NCAA is a monopoly, that is not my opinion. That is the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling in Alston v. NCAA, where the court found that the NCAA is a monopoly. As Justice Kavanaugh concurred, quote, "The NCAA's business model would be flatly illegal in almost any other industry in America. The NCAA is not above the law," end quote. After failing in the Supreme Court, the NCAA is now begging Congress for an antitrust bailout to be above the law because they want to continue enriching themselves through this monopoly. In fact, according to the NCAA's publicly available tax returns as a 501c3 nonprofit, in 2022, the NCAA paid its top 16 administrators an average salary of over $800,000 a year. Over the last 40 years, our antitrust laws have been the only force that have held the NCAA accountable. First in 1984, then in 1999, when coaches sued to end the NCAA's cap on their salaries, again in 2014, and most recently in 2021. Before granting the NCAA an antitrust bailout, we should first ask ourselves a fundamental question. Can we trust the NCAA? Because history has shown that the NCAA cannot be trusted. For example, in a 2013 wrongful death suit, the NCAA confessed in court, quote, The NCAA denies that it has a legal duty to protect college athletes, end quote. Then in 2020, Senator Blackburn stated, quote, the NCAA has failed when it comes to women in sports, sexual harassment, sexual abuse. How in the world are we going to be able to trust the NCAA to get this right? Senator Blackburn was referring to the sexual assault scandal at Baylor, where the NCAA's investigation ultimately concluded no rules were violated because rape is not an NCAA violation. And just last year, the Government Accountability Office found that only 7% of colleges even comply with Title IX. Even the NCAA's most powerful institutions now don't trust the NCAA, which is why the Power Four conferences have formed a new limited liability company to independently police NIL and revenue sharing outside of the NCAA's purview moving forward. If the NCAA cannot be trusted by parents to keep athletes safe, and they cannot be trusted by their own conferences, how can Congress trust them with the unchecked power of an antitrust bailout? One SEC athletic director even anonymously admitted, quote, let's be honest, we're all money laundering, end quote. Given that reality, if the NCAA gets an antitrust bailout, how do we hold them accountable when they inevitably abuse that power? Further, have we considered how Congress's actions here could permanently politicize college sports forever? That's why Senator Kennedy told the NCAA president, quote, you may regret asking Congress to intervene here. All of a sudden, you're going to be micromanaged, end quote. Instead of giving the NCAA a bailout, Justice Kavanaugh proposed a solution. Quote, colleges and college athletes could potentially engage in collective bargaining or seek some other negotiated agreement. The solution is simple. Partner with the players and give them an independent voice in this business. That's exactly what the UCAA is doing, but the Big Ten and SEC are refusing to meet with the players. Actions speak louder than words, and the NCAA's actions prove they cannot be trusted with an exemption from the laws. I urge this committee to reject the NCAA's request because it would erode our country's fundamental antitrust laws, set dangerous precedent for other billion-dollar monopolies, and permanently politicize college sports. Congress wields a big stick, and using it as a sewing needle to reshape the fundamental fabric of college sports may cause much more harm permanently than good. Instead, this committee should force the NCAA to simply follow the same laws as every other business in this country. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with some questions, and I will start that with a question for Coach Smith-Gilbert. Coach, budget constraints are not only measured in scholarships and roster spots, as you know. To have a successful track and field team, you need modern training equipment and world-class facilities. You also need support staff like personnel trainers, nutritionists, and strength and conditioning coaches. Can you talk about how budget constraints affect these types of support services and how that can affect your ability to recruit and retain the best track and field athletes overall?
Yes, as anybody who runs at all knows, your body is your implement in track and field. So in our sport, what you put in your body, what you eat, how you train, where you train, the type of surface you run on, all of those things make a difference. There's a lot of money we put in every year to just one student athlete, one by one, to make sure they are ready to be at their best at an elite level. And as I said, we are the groundwork for the U.S. Olympic team. So without these resources, if resources go elsewhere and we don't get them anymore, I don't see how we're going to be able to maintain developing elite athletes without the money to do it.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh, competing at the Olympics is a dream for many young athletes around the country, and the United States has a long history of strong athletic performance at the Olympics. However, the sports where American athletes excel at the Olympics generally don't make money for universities. But I kind of preface that with, how do you, as the director of athletics, how do you balance the investments at Wisconsin in non-revenue sports against investments in revenue-generating sports like football, as you mentioned in your testimony?
Well, thank you, Chairman Fitzgerald. First of all, we're very proud of the 17 Olympians that we had at the University of Wisconsin in last year's games. It's a point of pride for us. I mentioned earlier that 80% of our revenues are generated by the sport of football. Football serves as the financial engine that underwrites the cost of opportunity for just about every one of our other sports. Hundreds of athletes and the opportunity that they have to pursue their dreams athletically, obtain a degree, have the type of experience that's life-changing is made possible by the revenues generated by football, and to a much lesser extent, men's basketball. That's the model that we embrace. That's the model that, as an athlete myself, when I was 20 years old, I may not have understood the benefits of the way I do today. As I mentioned, having two daughters that are Division I volleyball players today.
Very good. Thank you. Coach Albiero. With the restrictions of the transfer portal eligibility lifted as a result of several state lawsuits, and then couple that with changes to the NIL, we're seeing athletes, particularly those who will not turn professional, extending their collegiate career beyond the traditional four-year term. So I'm just wondering, can you just talk about your experience so far with the portal and how that has affected decisions that your athletes have made?
Thank you. I think more than anything, providing some opportunity for choice, right? I'm not against that in any way, shape, or form. I think what the portal has created, in the sport of swimming, it's not like the athletes are trying to go shop around for another opportunity. It's created academic opportunities for potential master's degrees and so on and so forth. So it's not a problem necessarily that has impacted our sport tremendously. Now with potential changes coming up, the transfer portal could be a much bigger impact.
Very good, thank you. Coach Smith-Gilbert, kind of along the similar lines, do you have, what's been your experience with the portal so far? Do you have kind of this back and forth that's been going on with your athletes, even in the non-revenue setting?
Yes, it's affected us quite a bit in track and field and cross country. The main thing that concerns me is they're having more trouble being in majors that they actually want to be in, because when they transfer, they lose a lot of credits from one school to the next. I do think they should be able to go and transfer wherever they want, but I think the unlimited transfers have caused a problem with academic progress. And in my sport, as I said earlier, getting a degree is the main thing.
Very good, thank you. My time has expired. We now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes for his series of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cooper, is it fair to say that the NCAA is a repeat antitrust offender?
Yes.
And how many times has the NCAA lost in court on antitrust grounds?
At least 4 times so far.
And the NCAA still faces antitrust violation claims today, correct?
Yes.
The proposed House settlement contains both a salary cap and a roster cap. Should these be subject to antitrust scrutiny, and if so, why?
Yes, because the NCAA should follow the same laws as every other business in this country.
All of which have...
all of which are subject to antitrust laws unless they secure an exemption through collective bargaining like every other professional sports league in this country.
Now, the NCAA has argued that an antitrust exemption is necessary to protect college athletics generally, and is especially important to protect sports other than football and basketball. Do you think that an antitrust exemption would be appropriate, and how would such an exemption affect the athletes?
An exemption is not appropriate, and on the notion that there is not enough money is categorically false. In the Big Ten, the collective endowments of those universities alone is nearly $95 billion. And in terms of the spending in the Power Four, the average operating revenue for a Power Four institution was $158 million a year in 2022. Their spending on coaches' salaries was $29 million a year per school and $27 million a year on admin. And their average spend on medical expenses was $1.9 million per school.
And how much does that leave for the athletes?
How much of the spending is on athletes? And on student aid, they spent $15 million on average per school.
And you don't think an antitrust, why would an antitrust exemption not be appropriate? You said it wouldn't.
An antitrust exemption wouldn't be appropriate because it would give the NCAA power to abuse the laws and force athletes to, not follow the same laws as every other business in this country. They would continue enriching themselves off the backs of athletes without paying their labor force.
And if the NCAA wanted to protect Olympic sports at colleges, what are some of the things it could do?
The NCAA has 0 policies that protect Olympic sports currently. A simple thing they could do is mandating a 1-year notice period where the NCAA has to give notice that they are planning or that a school is planning to cut a sport. They could also pass a policy that says if your school has over $100 million a year in revenue, you can't cut sports because you can't justify that you don't have enough revenue to support those sports.
Thank you. Mr. Albiero, you noted the importance of Title IX, but the GAO found that only less than 7% of schools comply with Title IX, and the NCAA refuses to require Title IX compliance and even found systemic abuse to not violate their rules. Mr. Albiero, couldn't the NCAA act to ensure women have equal opportunity and they're not abused by their coaches?
Thank you for the question. In my opinion, we strive very hard at the University of Louisville to comply to Title IX rules. Certainly as a coach of female sport and as a father of a daughter who happens to swim, I feel Title IX has been an amazing opportunity and created an opportunity for athletes to grow in a protection for women's sports.
You're saying that at your school you do that.
Sure.
But the GAO found that less than 7% of schools comply with Title IX, and the NCAA refuses to require Title IX compliance, and even found systemic abuse to not violate their rules. So how would you say, why shouldn't the NCAA be required to ensure women have equal opportunity and they're not abused by their coaches?
Yeah, I'm not privy to other things that are happening around the country,
Okay.
if I may.
Okay, Mr. McIntosh, you said in your statement that, quote, "It is extremely important to the educators at our institutions that the focus of a student-athlete's college tenure remain based on education," unquote. If that is the case, then why do athletes miss class for sports if it is extremely important?
Thank you, Ranking Member Nadler. I think it's important to note that 94% of our student athletes graduate. That's our most recent graduation rate. While the schedule can be difficult and time constraints can be tight, our student athletes have shown that they can be successful in over 140 diverse programs within our university.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
Now recognize Chairman Jordan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McIntosh, if we follow Mr. Cooper's plan, what happens?
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. I think what happens is college athletes are eventually deemed to be employees. And that's a model that I've not had a student athlete ask to be deemed an employee.
What happens to non-revenue sports? What's happened to the Olympics? I mean, look, let me back up a second. I'm not a fan of the NCAA necessarily, but I am a fan of providing opportunity to young adults who want to compete while they're pursuing higher education, while they're pursuing their degree. Mr. Cooper says if we follow his plan, if we follow his plan, what's going to happen to the non-revenue, the Olympic sports that Ms. Smith-Gilbert talked about?
Yeah. Chairman Jordan, there'll be a tremendous amount of financial pressure placed on institutions. I think, admittedly, in conferences like the Big Ten, we could find a way to make it work. I think it will be detrimental to Olympic sports at lower levels.
Well, when I had Mr. Sankey, the SEC commissioner, in, he said if we don't do something, he anticipates that you lose all kinds of Olympic sports. Yeah. He says you're going to go to, 3. Now, of course, the NCAA, I think Division I, you got to have, 16 sports to be division? Yeah. So he says we're going to go to everyone's going to go to 16, and there'll be football, basketball, and whatever sport fits that school in the men's side, and then you'll have a comparable number or a higher number of women's sports to satisfy Title IX. Is that what you think happens if we don't do something? Which is my big concern.
I think that's an accurate portrayal of what a likely result might be.
Now, Mr. Cooper just said you can, as long as you give notice that we're going to drop your sport, but we're going to give you a year to get ready. Or if you're an athletic department that makes, I think he said, over $100 million in revenue, then that'll be enough to deal with the non-revenue problems. Does that work, do you think?
I think it's important just to let it be known, we don't have any desire to drop an Olympic sport. We have no desire to cut an Olympic sport. We have a desire to enhance the tradition that already exists within our Olympic sports. I don't know that giving 1 year's notice solves that problem. I think there are ways in which we can ensure that Olympic sports thrive within the House settlement.
Can the University of Wisconsin, I think you said you had $171 million operating budget. Would you be able to, the way things are going, continue to offer the 22 sports you currently do?
That is correct.
You can do that?
Yes, sir.
And you think you can continue to do that even if nothing changes?
Yes, sir. We'll be able to operate, it's 23 sports. We'll be able to offer and operate 23 sports with world-class opportunity, competitively, academically, made possible because of the stability provided by the House settlement.
That was my next question. The House settlement and the revenue sharing with the House settlement, you think will do that?
Yes, sir. The House settlement allows us to be successful, certainly in our revenue-sharing sports. Like I mentioned earlier, those revenue-generating sports, those sports fund the opportunity for all of our student athletes. The unstable environment that we are currently operating in is not sustainable to us. It's been a challenge, and I think it's been long overdue that we can now share revenues directly with those athletes in a fair way, in a generous way, and that will in turn support the entire model, the entire ecosystem, which we've been successful in the past.
Thank you. Ms. Smith-Gilbert, comments on some of the same things I asked Mr. McIntosh, if you could. I felt like you were wanting to jump in there.
No, I never want to jump in, but thanks for the question. I think if we're talking from an employment standpoint, I'm not an employer. I'm a teacher, a leader, and a mentor. So I think if you make student athletes follow an employment model, then it changes the relationship between the coach and the athlete. And athletes should not be put under the pressure of being employees at such a young age. So,
Mr. Albero?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that, and I think ultimately the impact in our sport, the sport of swimming and diving, which has been a foundational sport for the Olympic movement, will be severely impacted.
Yeah, I know. We've had the USOC in to talk with us. We've had Women's Volleyball Association, the Wrestling Coaches Association. All are very concerned about what happens to if we don't do something. What happens to the non-revenue sports that are part of our, as Ms. Smith-Gilbert talked about, part of our Olympic training ground. So that's a big concern I have. With that, I yield back. I thank the chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Now recognize the ranking member for unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I have two unanimous consent requests. The first is I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a post from bold.org titled, quote, "How do college athletes get paid?" It explains that only 1% of college athletes receive full scholarships.
Without
Therefore,
objection.
Therefore, most pay tuition at their respective universities, meaning Olympic sports are not a law center for athletic departments.
Without objection.
Thank you. The second unanimous consent request is I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article in the Washington Post dated January 21st, 2025, entitled "College Football has Turned Pro," titled, quote, "College football has turned pro, let's talk about those tax breaks," close quote, which illustrates how top schools in the NCAA collected more than $3 billion in revenue in 2023 without having to pay taxes because of their framing that their athletic activities further education, illustrating that the NCAA not only makes a high profit based on uncompensated labor, but also at the expense of U.S. taxpayers.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Raskin, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. The Terps are on a roll. The men's basketball team is piling up win after win, including Saturday night against Northwestern, and our women's team made it to the Big Ten quarterfinals. Thanks to recent changes, these highly competitive basketball players can get some tangible benefits from their extremely lucrative play and work by monetizing their personal publicity rights. Players can now use their name, their image, their likeness, revenue to invest in themselves and their families and their communities. But we're talking about whether we should give further power to the NCAA, a nominally nonprofit organization that collects hundreds of millions of dollars a year based primarily on the athletic performance of these students. They want federal statutory protections to enable them to roll back the positive changes that have been made for students to gain immunity from the consequences of breaking the law and to permanently prevent players from having a seat at the table. The NCAA has repeatedly put institutional profits over players' health and safety, academic achievement, and economic freedom. It is a repeat offender of our antitrust laws and has lobbied for decades to be wholly exempt from Title IX in law enforcement. The NCAA has had a monopoly on college sports and the revenue they generate for decades and has consistently failed to make needed changes to help the student players without outside pressure. Consider the situation of college women basketball players. The NCAA says that academics is a key part of the college athlete experience, and yet women players complain that their travel schedules meant they can go for a month without attending any of their courses in person. Despite claiming to care about athletes, the NCAA has allowed women basketball players to be pressured to play through their injuries. Despite claiming to care about the balance between sports and academic achievement, the NCAA has allowed schools to refuse to recognize course credits for transfer students. Despite claiming to care about the student side of the college athlete's life, the NCAA allows schools to prevent athletes from choosing the major they want if it conflicts with practice and travel schedules. Our Division I women basketball players are commonly required to practice and play an average of 50 hours a week, and yet for many, their low stipend means they're paid less than $10 an hour and cannot afford rent. Women college basketball players make less on their name, image, and likeness than their male counterparts. The Trump administration recently retracted guidance that would have ensured personal publicity opportunities were distributed fairly among athletes. The NCAA and the conference they work with want us to give them a law that would roll back recent positive changes for players, give the NCAA and conference immunity from the laws they break, and keep the players voiceless forever. We have consistently undervalued and underinvested in women's sports, but now that women's college basketball is clearly a profitable business for schools, conferences, and the NCAA, it's high time that women players get a seat at the table. But a collection of 120 Division I basketball players has been rejected by the commissioners of the Big Ten and the SEC. These players are not unionizing, they're not striking, they're just asking for a seat at the table, asking for the chance to provide input to the people who control their sport and their lives on the court. Colleagues, let's not give these repeat offenders a bailout. The NCAA only makes changes in response to congressional pressure or lawsuits. They've done little over the decades to make any proactive positive changes for the students. And even today, the conferences that make hundreds of millions on uncompensated college athlete labor refuse even to sit down with the players who pay their salaries. I thank our witnesses for coming here today. Mr. McIntosh, wait, are we on the openings?
No, we're on the questions.
Okay, Mr. McIntosh, if I said that the NCAA earned $1.28 billion in revenue in the 2022-23 school year, would that sound about right to you?
Yes, sir.
And if I said that the college football playoff series has brought in over $500 million this season in recent years, is that correct?
That sounds right.
Do any of these billions of dollars of revenue make their way into players' pockets? And I'm not talking about personal publicity rights here, only about the shares of broadcast revenue. Does it make it to the players?
Ranking member, that's a great question. I think it does make its way to the players through Alston payments, cost of attendance, and it funds the approximately $4 billion of
Just
scholarships.
reclaiming my time, but just in terms of direct payment to the players.
Alston payments are direct payments to players.
Okay, Mr. Cooper, until the House settlement is finalized, players who create the revenues that fuel the most competitive colleges' athletic departments, pay the salaries and the operating budget of the NCAA, and fund the conferences, they will not get any money from these highly profitable broadcasting deals. Is that right?
They currently do not. If the House settlement is approved, then schools will be allowed to share up to $20 million a year with them. However, schools will not be required to share any of that revenue.
Okay, and Mr.
Chairman.
Oh, sorry. Then I yield back.
Time has expired. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. Mr. McIntosh, your testimony touches on the outside forces that are driving changes in collegiate sports. As for negative changes, you have identified those to the transfer portal, which allows athletes to now transfer every year and face no ineligibility. Changes such as those are of great concern to me, representing a less populated state with smaller schools in Wyoming, which is a member of the Mountain West Conference, which must compete for recruits and players with the Power of 5 conferences and all other Division I schools. How have these changes incentivized or pressured student athletes to use the transfer portal more frequently?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think it's a great question. I think the combination of third-party NIL and the permissibility of unlimited transfers has put our coaches in a really tough position, and it's caused our student athletes, it's harmed their academic progress. It's created roster instability, which I think is not fair to teammates on those teams. In short, it's put us in an extremely unstable environment. I think this is an area in which we need help. We need help from Congress to be able to create common sense rules that would allow student athletes to transfer for the right reasons, but also preserve their academic progress towards degree.
What are some of the recommendations that you would make in that regard?
I think there have been many discussions and explorations of possibilities, concepts like one transfer permissible in a period of time. Like, these are areas that we would explore. I think there is a need for a student athlete voice in that discussion, and these are the kind of things that we talk to with our student athletes.
Well, one of the things that I see, again, especially coming from a state like Wyoming, where we don't have professional sports. Our only sports are the University of Wyoming. And it's incredibly important to the people of Wyoming that we maintain a competitive basketball team, football team, but we also have wrestling. We have rodeo. And that's something that I don't think people have talked much about, the impact on rodeo teams of what you're discussing today. But I can see a circumstance where we might recruit somebody. Josh Allen went to the University of Wyoming, one of the greatest football players of all time. And I can see where we would recruit someone to be the cornerstone of a team, only to have that person lured away by another school, which would essentially or could essentially destroy the entire program, at least for that year, if not for a longer period of time. I think that that is a very significant issue that does need to be addressed. And I want to protect the athletes as well. But I think one of the things that we've always done when we look at college athletics is this gives students an opportunity to be part of a team after high school, to be part of a track and field team, to be part of a swim team, to have that experience, while at the same time going to college and getting the degree that is so necessary for their long-term well-being. And Ms. Smith-Gilbert, when we have these kind of transfer situations, what does that do to a student's ultimate academic record and their ability to get the degree so that they have the successes long-term? Because I would assume, I don't know the percentage, but I would assume it's a very small percentage of people who actually go on to make this a career, to become professional athletes. So providing that education, I think, is highly important. What does the ease of transfer do to the ability to provide that academic experience that they need?
In the sport of track and field, that's a really good question, Congresswoman. What I'm finding is unlimited transfers, and you have to understand, in track and field, we may have 4 or 5 windows of the transfer portal per year. Cross country has a window, indoor has a window, outdoor has a window, so there's never stable. So you may have someone running this week at Nationals who may get in the portal on Monday and leave, but they have to go to school and finish classes, but it's in the middle of the semester. So they're looking around in the middle of the season to try to see where they can go, where their credits will transfer, where they'll be accepted to the next school. Or what I'm finding is, as much as I push them to get a master's degree, a lot of times depending on when they transfer, it's not a viable option because maybe admissions isn't accepting graduate degrees at that time, or you're off track. So they end up taking undergraduate classes all for nothing, just anything, to just be at the new school. And I think that's very detrimental when they could have had a master's degree.
I think it is too. One other issue, and I'm almost out of time, but I think we also need to talk about the regulation associated with agents and their access to students, and make sure that we are protecting the students from what I would consider to be predators almost in the way that they treat our athletes. I don't have time to go into that, but I very much appreciate you being here and addressing this complicated subject. With that, I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Now recognize Ranking Member Raskin for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one is from the New York Post entitled, "Ex-Wisconsin Women's Basketball Player Makes Disturbing Abuse Allegations Against Head Coach." And the other is from a press release from the University of Wisconsin Badgers titled, "Mosley Resigns from Wisconsin Women's Basketball."
Without objection, gentleman from California is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd like to start out with asking unanimous consent to submit documents for the record. Information sheet from Chapman University entitled Athletics NCAA Division III Fact Sheet for Congressional Districts 40 and 46. Letter dated March 10th of this year from Cal State Fullerton, Department of Intercollegiate Athletics. And both of these letters address the issue of college athletes becoming employees and ask Congress to address the national landscape related to NIL and other matters. Third letter from Student Athlete Advisory Committees, Division 1, 2, and 3. Article from the Daily Breeze titled Loyola Marymount made a tough choice to drop 6 sports. Will other universities follow? And finally, Bloomberg Law article entitled College Unions Raise Specter of Scholarship Tax Hit.
Without objection.
And I want to start out by thanking the NCAA for making a total mess college sports. Given that track record, we find ourselves today where NCAA is asking for an antitrust exemption in perpetuity, given that college sports are still evolving. It's a very interesting ask. I just ask, Mr. Chairman, that we do have additional hearings to address these issues here. All of us are college sports fans, whether it be football, basketball. Personally, I love college wrestling. But to think the amount of money that's involved in college sports, just USC recently signed a $110 million contract, 10-year contract with their head coach of football. On the other hand, I'm going to show you something. This is the last football helmet from my alma mater, Cal State Fullerton. Second largest school in California, 42,000 athletes. In 1992, because of budget reasons. What did I say? 42,000 athlete students. Mostly blue-collar working families, my neighbors. Cut football in 1992 because of budgetary reasons. 2010, they cut the wrestling team because of budgetary reasons. This was especially painful to me because a lot of the kids in my neighborhood, they're street kids. If it wasn't for wrestling, God knows where they'd be. And more importantly, wrestling gave them a taste of success that has changed their lives. Now, local athletic programs don't offer college wrestling. Limits their educational opportunities because most of them don't have scholarships. They live in the neighborhood, they've got to go to a place where they can live at home and wrestle. Mr. Chairman, there are college athletes in 1,000 plus schools, D2, D3. They're not football or basketball powerhouses. My question today is, how will these changes affect those blue-collar, middle-class families, students that are trying to get their college education? So my question to all of you, beginning with Mr. Cooper, is how will allowing athletes to become employees help or harm these thousands of students that are trying to get a college education? Mr. Cooper. And let's start talking about becoming employees. Go ahead.
So there's clearly a difference between D2, D3, and D1 institutions, which is why the NCAA has those distinctions. A similar distinction will inevitably be drawn between the Power Five and the rest of D1, because there's 32 conferences in D1, and the lower resource institutions in D1 and Wisconsin and
Good, bad?
Good, bad? What do you mean?
If you're an employee, is that going to hurt?
Well, the same rules don't need to be imposed on every athlete. The D1 rules
So
and the
we
D2
need to
rules are
study
not the
this issue a
same.
little bit more then, is what you're saying. The solution isn't clear yet.
There isn't a simple solution that can be summarized in 30
Mr.
seconds that
Abiero?
applies to all athletes.
Mr. Abiero, I have 8 seconds left. Mr. Abiero.
Yeah, my concern, again, from a standpoint of swimming and diving, an Olympic sport, non-revenue sport, the employee model would be extremely detrimental to us. Simple as starting with the level of services that we provide, from mental health support, nutrition, athletic training, medical support. All of a sudden, those things could be taxed. It creates a nightmare
Thank you
scenario.
very much. Ms. Smith?
The employee model will affect us in track and field because I have majority student athletes from underserved communities, and they're not going to have the money to pay for these resources. They have no other
They
way.
could negotiate a collective bargaining contract to pay for those resources.
I don't know about that. I'm a track coach, maybe.
Mr. McIntosh?
Congressman, what I would say is I participated as a professional athlete, as an employee. I was injured in my second year, and I was terminated after my third year. That's a system that is more adverse to an athlete than the system that we live in today, in which our student athletes have guaranteed scholarships regardless of injury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time, and like I said, I do hope to have further hearings on this issue.
Gentleman's time has expired. Now recognize the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am delighted that the committee is having this hearing. This is a very important issue to me. I came to Congress in part to work specifically on this issue. In the Washington State Legislature, I was the chair of the Commerce, Labor, and Sports Committee, worked a lot on higher education issues, and here I've helped found the Bipartisan College Sports Caucus. So this is a very important issue to me, and I campaigned on this issue, so I've spent a considerable amount of time talking to my voters because we care quite a bit about this issue. College sports is very, very important to the American public. It contributes to social cohesion. It contributes to opportunities for young people, and it also is vitally important for our economies in our region. These are highly subsidized public goods, that we're dealing with in college education. And while I am delighted that we have 2 members from the Big Ten and the SEC here, and I very much want to work with you on these issues, it is difficult for me to sit here as someone from the Pac-12 knowing that the greed of ESPN and the football programs at the Big Ten and the SEC have contributed to the breakdown in the traditional model in college athletics. That's very tough to me. I mean, Mr. McIntosh, I do want to work on this issue, but can you in good faith tell me that it is in the best interest of student athletes for volleyball players or Olympic athletes to travel across the country on a weekly basis? Does a national sports league in college athletics make any sense when it comes to student athlete welfare?
Well, Congressman, thank you for your question. First, I'd like to say I'm empathetic to your position on the breaking up of the Pac-12. I think it was a tragic situation in the landscape of college athletics. I would say this to your question, sir. Our student athletes already play a national schedule. Our student athletes travel all over the country, whether they're in revenue-generating sports or Olympic sports, to play all over the country and to play the best teams.
Well, I would disagree, and when I talk to most taxpayers, they think it is absurd that the volleyball team from Oregon or the University of Washington is traveling across the country to play schools like Maryland. And in fact, if you look at the frequent comments by coaches like the basketball coach at UCLA, he's also talked about the strain this year that is putting on student athletes to travel across the country. So I think for the good of taxpayers, I think for when we put hopefully put the genie back in the bottle here, we do need to seriously look at student athlete welfare on this issue. Mr. Cooper, in college athletics, football makes a ton of money. There's a ton of money, particularly in Power 5 football. The current model tries to pay for everything else with that football money, but in the era of unfettered free agency, in the era of NIL, where there's no salary caps, we have this uncontrolled arms race in football that allows coaches to make considerable sums of money, but it is now the Olympic sports that have a lot of value that are at risk. So in your model, how would athletes be treated if they were treated with, if you were to be successful? Would Shedeur Sanders or someone that is a very high profile athlete, would he receive more in payments than a college wrestler? Or how does your group envision payments working if you were to be successful?
Yeah, so as you emphasize, these are highly subsidized public goods, and that is an important fact to remember here. And because they have not been operating under the antitrust laws, they have been inefficiently allocating these funds, and they conceal how much money they're spending on their own salaries, frankly. In terms of whether athletes should all be paid equally, I think most folks would agree that the funds generated by a sport should go to that sport. And how those decisions are made should not be made unilaterally by administrators in closed doors, and they should be held accountable by taxpayers to spend that money efficiently, both in how they're compensating coaches and administrators, but also how they're compensating athletes.
Well, if we were to do that, football's the one that makes all the money. And if under that model, then all the money stays with football players, and it is the Olympic athletes that would continue to suffer. So I think that you need to think through exactly what that would mean to how we save Olympic sports, and I would say, just in closing, I have 5 kids. 2 of them participate in track and field. 2 of them were All-Americans in junior athletics, and I would love them to be runners someday at either West Point or Washington State University. And I just really believe that the current model is that it is too broken. If this Congress does not do something to step forward to save Olympic sports, that my kids, your kids, every kids are not going to have that opportunity, because it's all going to be in football with the SEC and the Big Ten and ESPN and Fox Sports and a bunch of backroom deals of TV execs, instead of elected, accountable officials who are responsible to the taxpayers. So we got to sort this out. This has to get fixed in this Congress. And I showed up here with a lot of people talking about this issue, but we really have to fix this. And it can't be the typical union, non-union, demonization schools, NCAA is evil. We really have to work on this issue and come to a solution. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Recognize the ranking member for unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is from the Athens Banner Herald, titled "Details on What University of Georgia is Paying New Track Coach Raises for Tennis Coach and Hoop Assistants."
Without objection. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. College sports are unique in that they unite and they inspire parts of our country that may not have a professional team. And we saw that firsthand in Vermont as our Catamounts electrified the entire state on the way to winning the Division I 2024 Men's Soccer National Championship. Go Cats. So college sports are exciting. They inspire us. They also pose a dilemma, particularly when we talk about big-time football and basketball. Is it right that a multi-billion-dollar industry does not pay its workers? And I want to appreciate that you're all here today giving your valuable time. I want to direct that question to Mr. Cooper. What's your perspective on that intense contradiction?
No, it is fundamentally wrong that they do not pay their workers.
And so one of the things that I want to lift up right now, Mr. Cooper, is that you're also somebody who has spoken in the past about the mental health impact on college athletes. I just want to give you a few minutes to talk about that. It's something that's very important to me.
Thank you. And for me as well, that's why I got into this. When I was a student at Washington State University, our quarterback, Tyler Holinsky, my classmate, died by suicide. And that is what compelled me to work with his family, to advocate for mental health. And through that, I was elected the SAC president, the Student Athlete Advisory president at Washington State. And the more I pushed for mental health policies at the school and in the conference, the more pushback I got, and they refused to do anything or to listen to our concerns. And the reality is this business is so lucrative that there is so much money being thrown at coaches, they put that pressure on athletes, and there is not, the NCAA has a rule that says you can only spend 20 hours a week on sport. But a Pac-12 study found that athletes are working 50 hours a week, and there's nothing stopping them from doing 60, 70. There's no accountability in the system as a whole. And so that is...
It's tied up in this issue, isn't it?
Yeah, from a mental health standpoint, if you are working 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, and you also have to go to class, it is ripe for abuse, and athletes' mental health is suffering. And college athlete suicide rate has doubled over the last 20 years. And that is largely in part due to the fact that there are no enforceable safety mandates in this business. There are only guidelines and recommendations, but when a coach actually breaks the rules, there's no accountability whatsoever, and there's no mechanism for athletes to hold them accountable.
I really, really appreciate what you've just said here, because I think it's important for us to focus on who should we be looking out for. We should be looking out for those student athletes. So thank you so much. It does seem unfair to me and many folks here in this committee hearing that young athletes put their bodies and their minds on the line for mass entertainment, and yet they're not paid directly for their work. Now, I've heard some good discussion here today on what is, in fact, a pretty complex topic. There's a lot to consider regarding NIL deals, looking at NCAA Antitrust exemption, and whether we ought to consider these athletes as employees under labor law. And I know that it's important for us to ask who is best equipped to handle these complicated questions. And I would argue that the experts at the agencies that Congress has empowered to handle employment issues and enforcement of antitrust laws are the ones best equipped. So I'm talking about the National Labor Relations Board. I'm talking about the Federal Trade Commission. I'm talking about the Department of Justice. And the courts have a role here too. As we've heard, we may have a settlement this year providing for the payment of college athletes. Now, it would be great for Americans if we had these institutions ready to help us sort out these issues, but we don't, because we have an administration right now who is partnering with Elon Musk to dismantle some of these agencies. We should be talking about whether we owe college athletes additional compensation, but we should also be talking about the agencies that the Trump administration is illegally dismantling, the ones that Congress has empowered to solve problems like college athlete compensation. We don't have an independent board in charge of determining whether these athletes can collectively bargain. Why not? Because the president illegally fired a board member and the entire board is now deadlocked. At the FTC, we've seen antitrust division staff terminated, and for some odd reason, they're forced to move to the USAID building. And that agency is also deadlocked and in chaos because of this administration's actions. I don't even have enough time, because I see I'm running short here, on the abuses happening at the Department of Justice. My point is this: let's keep the main thing the main thing. We have agencies that can help us to look at these complex issues, and right now we are not funding those agencies to do their jobs. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman for holding this hearing. Thank our witnesses for being here as well. I want to echo what the gentlelady said. This is about the student athletes, and we need to keep that in mind first and foremost, keeping in mind that they are student athletes, and we should do no harm so that they do not unintentionally, through a government destruction of the sports industry, become only students and don't have the opportunity to become student athletes. I was a student athlete at a very small school. I swam Div 3 because I wasn't fast enough to swim Div 1. And it was a great program, but Mr. Alberto, if student athletes become employees, which they are not now, Div 1 schools like James Madison University in my district, other Division III programs in Virginia, Washington and Lee, Bridgewater, they may struggle to afford salaries and benefits. Would this force schools to cut sports like swimming or reduce participation?
Thank you. Unquestionably, I think that we're already seeing some of those changes right now and some of the pressures in programs dropping. Specifically, Cal Poly recently just dropped men's and women's swimming. It's a travesty. Small school, phenomenal academic environment. To your point, those opportunities are now gone. So we strongly are very concerned about this model and the pressures that will put on Olympic sports, specifically non-revenue sports.
Do you think that schools in Div 2, Div 3, do you think they should be exempt from athlete employment rules if those are set up due to financial constraints? Or would that complicate the situation even worse?
Well, there are three different divisions, right? And they have different priorities in each one of those. So I'm not sure how that would apply unilaterally, but certainly an important topic.
So many students in Div 3 schools in my district and across the country play sports as a passion rather than as a career path. That was my goal. As if college athletes are classified as employees, could this discourage student participation at schools without major financial backing?
100%, I think, is a very strong possibility.
So if there is some kind of tiered employment model where only Power 4 athletes are treated as employees, again, you indicated that that might be a solution, but it might be just adding complicating factors to the situation.
I would agree with that. And I think, again, back to ultimately the impact in all sports, non-revenue sports, I think would be devastating.
If student athletes become employees, would schools need to provide health care, workers' comp, and retirement benefits?
It comes with being an employee, right? And I think that's something that's really important. And to a point earlier, in terms of mental health support, it's something that for us is really important at the University of Louisville, and we've invested seriously in that area with the tune of 10 professionals that now work with our programs.
And would smaller programs be able to afford this, and would that potentially lead to program cuts?
It's possible to think that way, clearly.
Mr. McIntosh, employee status could mean that scholarships and benefits are taxable income for athletes. Should Congress provide tax exemptions for scholarships if athletes are reclassified as employees?
Thank you, Congressman. I think the idea of classifying student athletes as employees, even at the Autonomy 4 level, is one that we need to be careful and examine closely. At Wisconsin, we have 23 sports. 6 of those sports generate revenue. 2 of those sports turn a profit. It's those profits that fund the opportunity for everyone else. To grant an exemption for employees in an Olympic sports, I would just tell you that the detriment to those student athletes, the tax consequence that they would face given the benefits that they already receive, the guarantees that they're already benefiting from guaranteed scholarships will be put at risk.
And could tax burdens discourage athletes from enrolling in certain states with higher income taxes? I mean, that could be a factor as well. You look at states, I don't know about Wisconsin. I don't know that they have how their tax rates are. I know Vermont's are pretty high, but Virginia's
too high.
Virginia's are too high. But what would you say to that?
I think it should be a priority of ours to allow the academic and athletic reputation of our institutions stand alone and be what decides, what helps a young person decide what school they're going to go to. And I'm not sure that state by state tax law or...
Not the tax rates.
Not tax rates. I'm not sure that's where we want to compete.
I appreciate that. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman.
I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel titled "The Pressure on Student Athletes Keeps Mounting."
Without objection, gentleman from Illinois is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Fitzgerald, and to the witnesses here today. So we're here today to discuss whether the NCAA, a nonprofit organization that makes over $1 billion a year off of uncompensated college athlete labor, safe harbor from antitrust laws. In some ways, this is a complex and nuanced legal issue, but for me, it's a pretty simple question. It's whether or not people have rights, labor rights at that. Let me be clear. I'm a strong supporter of college athletics, but I'm also proud that Illinois enacted a law led by State Representative Cam Buckner and others allowing college athletes to be paid for the use of their name, image, and likeness. And it's because of my strong support for college athletics that I strongly oppose legislation that grants the NCAA an antitrust exemption and prohibits athletes from being recognized as employees. Let's talk about the facts. The fact is that athletes are controlled by their institutions, and many of them spend more than 50 hours a week on their sport while in season. The fact is that the entire college athlete system is designed to suppress the compensation and labor rights of players. The fact is that NCAA is big business. In the 2023 school year, it earned $1.28 billion in revenue from the labor of players who receive none of that revenue. And the fact is that coaches and athletic directors profit handsomely from this system. In 2023, the highest paid state official in 43 states was a college coach. And here in the room, we have an athletic director that makes $1.45 million per year and oversees a program that spends nearly $200 million per year. So I just don't buy the argument that there isn't enough money to pay athletes. And I don't believe that Congress should forever prevent athletes from exercising their labor rights, whether we like it or not, we like the term or not. Let me ask you, Mr. Cooper, if players cannot be recognized and employees, what other avenues do they have to seek critical changes to the system that controls their lives, their sport, and their compensation?
None. They would have to go through Congress or file lawsuits, both of which are incredibly difficult processes, and they wouldn't have any way to hold the NCAA accountable in the same way they have no way now.
Thank you. And I want to quickly touch on an important point here about our federal agencies. College athletes are fighting right now for the right to be recognized as an employee under the National Labor Relations Act. I strongly support their efforts, but even if they win their fight, they will have limited recourse to enforce their rights because of Donald Trump and Elon Musk and their efforts to gut the NLRB. That's why I've spoken out against the illegal attempts to fire Gwen Wilcox, who was reinstated in a blistering court opinion last week, and it's why I continue to fight against the dismantling of agencies that uphold critical rights like the Department of Education, which enforces Title IX, as you have testified. But let's be clear. The reason why Republicans are doing this is because these agencies fight for workers and Republicans fight for billionaires. I'll continue to fight real hard on behalf of all Americans, not just the rich and powerful. And Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, I ask unanimous consent. Thank you. I have a the unanimous consent request is to add the record a memorandum written by the NLRB General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo to all regional directors and officers in charge, dated September 29, 2021, titled Statutory Rights of Players and Academic Institutions, Student Athletes, under the National Labor Relations Act, which proves through the case at Northwestern University that college athletes must be considered employees under Section 2C of the NLRA, and that leading them to believe that they do not have a statutory protections is a violation of Section 8A1 of the Act.
Without objection, the gentleman's time has expired. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you of the panels that are here. I appreciate your testimonies. I've had an opportunity to read through them as well as what you've shared today. I'll be brief. Director McIntosh, are you facing pressures internally to make your student athletes employees?
No, sir. My student athletes are not asking to become employees.
So you're saying your student athletes don't want to be employees?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I have serious concerns that classifying student athletes as employees would ruin college sports as we know it. In fact, if student athletes unionize, it could alleviate antitrust scrutiny, but more likely, employee status would have the effect of increasing antitrust scrutiny among a host of other problems. So, Mr. McIntosh, as we consider ways for Congress to act to protect the relationship between student athlete and the universities, what problems do you think might arise if we fail to act?
Well, Congressman, I think we're in a world right now, an environment right now that is not sustainable, that is not stable, and we need Congress's help to create some stability so that we can ensure that the mission of college athletics, first and foremost, the education, second, broad-based opportunity, and third, the competitive equity can be delivered upon. I fear right now, given the environment and the direction that we're going, that we will not be able to do that in the future. I fear that rules meant to create stability for college athletics are being challenged every day in the courts, and this is an area in which we need your help.
And what might happen if some states or schools classified student athletes as employees while others did not? What do you see in that scenario?
Well, Congressman, I don't think that's a great scenario, and I think it raises issues of competitive equity and fairness that are pretty dire.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. McIntosh, the other side, the previous speaker talked about, I think the term he used was uncompensated labor of college athletics. What's a full grant and aid scholarship over 5 years? What's that for a college athlete?
In total, sir, $125,000.
Room, board, books, tuition, tutoring, everything they get is $125,000 a year, or?
No, I'm sorry. I thought you meant that was tuition, sir.
Just tuition?
Yes.
When you add it all up, books, board, the clothing they get, the food they get, the meal plan, the tutors, everything, what's it over 5 years, which most athletes redshirt a year, they go 5 years. What's that total?
Sir, on a per average basis, it's an investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars per athlete.
Okay, and now the House decision is going to say we got $20 million coming to the university that you can then divvy up with the athletes as well. Is that right? On top of what you just described.
That is correct.
And then there's also, for some athletes, particularly some of the best football, basketball players, whatever, they're going to get NIL money from some business person who wants them to advertise at the car dealership or whatever. So there's that revenue for the athlete, that income for the athlete as well.
That is correct. Market-based NIL.
And then we have at the big places, the big universities, the collective, which is out raising money to also get athletes to come, typically football players. I don't know what your collective is. I know at Ohio State it's a lot of money. My guess is at the University of Wisconsin it's a lot of money too. That also gets given to certain athletes. Is that right?
That is correct.
So it's far from uncompensated labor. In fact, they're getting maybe over $1 million, a couple $1 million, maybe more. I know in the sport of wrestling, an All-American who goes to the portal and transfers somewhere, they're getting $200,000-$300,000 in the sport of wrestling. So the quarterback's got to be getting millions of dollars. So this idea that there's uncompensated labor is just false. What we want is a system where all these student athletes get an opportunity to continue to do what they do, participate in sports, not hurt our Olympic movement. That's what we're trying to get. And again, I'm not sure what the answer is, but we're trying to figure it out.
That's absolutely correct, Chairman Jordan. I think right now, our student athletes have been benefiting from opportunities that exist outside of our ecosystem, outside of our department. We look forward to the pending settlement of the House case that will allow us for the first time to contribute revenues directly to our student athletes. It's been a long time coming. It's a long overdue, and we're embracing it, and we're excited about it.
All right. I think the gentleman for yield, and yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cooper, do you believe that urban and suburban athletes recruited to play football and basketball, which are the net positive revenue-generating sports, do you think it's fair that those players in those sports subsidize the Olympic aspirations of those who are looking to, make it to the Olympics in archery? Or football, or rowing, or fencing, or water polo, or beach volleyball, or sailing, and canoeing, things that those urban students and suburban students who are playing football and basketball, they or their classmates in high school, they have no opportunity to do those. But is it fair that they subsidize the Olympic aspirations of the country club set?
The predominantly black football and basketball players who generate the vast majority of the revenue, they should have rights, worker rights, and be entitled to a share of the revenue that they generate. From an Olympic sports standpoint, the Olympic sports could easily be subsidized by university endowments or through state and federal funding. This country is we're one of the only countries in the world that does not federally fund Olympic sport development.
Well, gosh, I'm troubled here by the fact that the chairman of the committee talks about how, $125,000 a year in scholarship and, room and board and that kind of thing over 5 years, and doing that for, a number of athletes in football and in basketball is a lot of money that the school is giving those players, while at the same time we got a guy like Jimbo Fisher being paid $77.5 million in a contract buyout when he lost his coaching job. Can you explain to me how we could pay one man $77.5 million for a contract buyout, while at the same time, really nickeling and diming those athletes upon whose labor that money is being paid out to the coach? How can you justify that?
You can't. And those same administrators testified that there is not enough money to fund Olympic sports. And if they were forced to follow the same laws as every other business in this country, they would be forced to become more fiscally responsible than they currently are and spend less on their own salaries and, more on worker athlete or college athlete compensation packages.
So the NCAA is crying out for an antitrust exemption, telling us that forcing them to compete for talent on a level playing field would lead to the death of college sports. I find that hard to believe that an organization earning $1.3 billion a year doesn't have enough money to go around, and that's not even including the revenue these schools get from the football playoff and bowl games, which are operated separately from the NCAA. Mr. McIntosh, what is the median salary for a head football coach at a Division I school? It's about $3.5 million, isn't it? plus bonuses. Isn't that correct?
I won't disagree.
Are you suggesting that the black men who are playing football and basketball are interested in supporting your lobbying efforts to stifle their economic opportunities in playing college sports?
Absolutely not, Congressman. In fact, I think you and I are in agreement that it's time for those athletes, specifically in college football and college basketball, to benefit from the revenues that they're creating. The House settlement allows for that, 22% of those revenues that would go then to support them, the success from their sports, the profits from their sports.
Why do you need an antitrust exemption? Why do you need an antitrust exemption?
We need your help to ensure that those same athletes that I'm talking about, those football players, basketball players, and all those in the Olympic sports, one area where we need your help is so that they're not considered to be employees.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Go ahead.
I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report authored by Craig Garthwaite and others for the National Bureau of Economic Research titled "Who Profits from Amateurism, Rent Sharing in Modern College Sports," and it explains how money is generated by predominantly black lower-income athletes and shifted into the benefit of predominantly white Olympic athletes from higher income backgrounds.
Without objection, Ranking Member Raskin is now recognized for a UC request.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This one is from the National Library of Medicine, dated February 2017. On average, 2 NCAA football players die per season.
Without objection, gentleman from Kansas is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to my colleague from South Carolina, Mr. Fry.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. What's interesting to me in this whole debate is this is the disconnect from Washington, D.C. with the rest of the world, right? That we're talking about a federalization on the other side of college athletes with commissions and regs and all this stuff. That is the disconnect, right? When you cross the Potomac, somehow these things crop up. Last week in the Energy and Commerce Committee, we heard from student athletes, and they resoundingly said, we don't want the employee model. We hear that on the other side, that this is where we should go. We hear from the coaches today, who are very talented. They don't want the employee model because it changes the face of a student athlete. And so, Director McIntosh, you're on the hot seat for a little bit, but I want to kind of walk through some of the implications that if Congress were to adopt what others on the other side are saying in an employee model, what does that do?
Well,
So first of all, if they're employees, you have an employer-employee relationship, which presumably means that they could get fired if they're injured. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, and you also have additional taxes that the university would pay on their behalf, the student athlete's behalf. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Of course, they would be paying taxes now as well on any revenue that they receive, right?
I think it's actually worse than that, Congressman. I think they would be taxed on the revenue that they received and taxed on benefits that they currently receive in which they're not paying taxes on.
Right, so mental wellness coaches, tutors, room and board, food, swag that they get, these will all be taxable under existing law. Is that correct?
Potentially.
Okay. What happens in the event that an athlete is injured?
I think that's the problem. One of the benefits that our student athletes have right now is they have guaranteed scholarships for 4 years, even if they are injured. I lived this myself as an employee in a sports organization in the NFL as a player. I was injured in the second year of my contract, and I was terminated after the third year.
All right, so how many student athletes are at the University of Wisconsin?
Approximately 800, sir.
What's that? 800. So if you go to an employee model, you have just hired 800 additional employees of the university, correct?
Theoretically, yeah.
What does that do to your budget?
It puts tremendous pressure on our budget. I'm trying to envision our HR department posting 800 positions posting a position for a wide receiver on our football team, it seems impractical, sir.
Right, and so, and to be fair, you might, as the University of Wisconsin, be able to absorb better than other schools, correct? So smaller schools would be really on the chopping block.
I think that is true. I think we would have a better chance. I think it would be detrimental to programs at lower levels.
So if we decided to go to an employee model, which I think is a mistake, you're now paying more money. And what happens naturally when you've got to pay more money, but there's a finite amount of money that you are budgeted every year? You have to make cuts elsewhere. Is that correct?
We would be forced to find the money through growing of revenues or cutting of expenses.
Okay, and cutting of expenses probably means cutting of sports, correct?
We would take every step necessary to avoid that. That would be the last resort.
But it is a reality that that could happen.
I think that would be a reality for many programs at lower levels.
And also what happens too, this has not been discussed at all. So if you're injured as a college athlete and you're considered an employee of the university when you're injured, does that also trigger workers' compensation laws within the state?
Presumably.
What does that do to the state budgets that are impacted?
It's not good for them.
So basically all the schools, including, we did a liability safe harbor bill last year that was supported by big schools, small schools, historically black colleges, student athlete organizations and entities, because they need that oxygen in which to come up with their own framework. But if we go to this model, that's the rub, is that when somebody is injured, which injuries happen in college sports, you're now blowing wide open a state budget from a workers' compensation perspective, because student athletes do get hurt. They recover, but they do get hurt. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. I just think it's important that we remind ourselves this is not what our student athletes are asking for.
I'm going to take it just briefly in my last remaining seconds. The NCAA and other entities, and I'm not going to apologize for prior actions of the NCAA, but they can't even enforce the rules right now without being sued. And I understand that y'all are, like I say collectively, the college sports are seeking a liability safe harbor that would kind of go along with any federal legislation. How important is that liability shield to help preserve college athletics in the future?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. I think it's extremely important. I think it's important to distinguish that we are not asking for a blanket antitrust exemption. We are looking for a limited safe harbor in areas in which we need to be allowed to make rules, like around eligibility, that can preserve the opportunity for future student athletes in the future. I don't think we want 12, 13-year college athletes. And those are the types of rules right now that are being determined by the courts.
So like the basketball player that just was granted his 8th year of eligibility, right? So I'm not going to call him out by name, but we're institutionalizing the Van Wilders of college sports if we go down that model.
That's the risk that's out there right now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Without, do you have one? Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. 2 quick UC requests. One about football concussions in the New York Times, dated February 1, 2021.
Without objection.
And this one is an interview with Mr. McIntosh on the Trust website describing the health benefits he had by virtue of being in the NFL with the Players Association.
Without objection. All members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.
That was a quick hearing.
It was good. Yeah.